Well, joining me now from Sydney is the Acting Shadow Treasurer Helen Coonan. Good afternoon.
Hello, Ashley.
Mr Turnbull says he regrets ever meeting Godwin Gretsch. What else do you think he should be regretting about his handling of this affair?
Well, I think he's given a very concise and believable account of the email affair. It's very clear now that Mr Gretsch actually initiated the contact with Mr Turnbull and my colleague Senator Abetz, that he certainly wasn't pressured in relation to his evidence, that he voluntarily came forward, and it's equally clear, I think, that Mr Turnbull and Senator Abetz were deceived along with the rest of us as to the alleged authenticity of the email. And I would just add to that I also have known Mr Gretsch for a number of years, and I knew him professionally in my capacity as the former Assistant Treasurer, some Assistant Treasurers back, and there was absolutely no reason why you would not have given credence to something that Mr Gretsch told you. It wouldn't have even occurred to me, for example, to second guess him in the dealings that I'd had with him. So Mr Turnbull, I think, now has given a very full account of how this occurred and has absolutely scotched the idea that there was any pressure brought to bear on Mr Gretsch, or indeed that Mr Gretsch behaved anything other than voluntarily.
Even though that Mr Turnbull says that is the case, do you think that he did overreach when he did call for the Prime Minister to resign over this matter?
Well, he's always said, and it is the fact, that what he accused the Prime Minister and the Treasurer of in relation to this matter related solely to the evidence given publicly and given on the record in a Senate committee. So Mr Turnbull was entitled, no doubt, to assume that the evidence given by Mr Gretsch and given in such a solemn way was believable and founded very serious allegations if true. So I do think that Mr Turnbull deserves some slack for taking at face value an account given by such a credible witness in public to a Senate inquiry.
Could Malcolm Turnbull have handled it better, though, even if this was someone that the coalition had relied on before? Shouldn't Malcolm Turnbull have been a bit more cautious before calling for the Prime Minister, of all people, to resign? Well,
I think with the benefit of hindsight, Mr Turnbull says himself that he wished he hadn't had this encounter, but I do think that given the history of Mr Gretsch's credibility as a very senior, respected public servant, respected on both sides of the record, Mr Turnbull was entitled to believe, if he was told that this was an email that was authentic, that Mr Turnbull was certainly entitled to accept what Mr Gretsch said. But he didn't just rely on that. Of course, he grounded what he subsequently said on evidence given publicly for all the world to see in a Senate inquiry and in circumstances where one would be entitled to believe Mr Gretsch's evidence.
Do you think it was all a bit too good to be true, though? Shouldn't Malcolm Turnbull have realised it at some point?
Well, pundits, of course, always say if things are look too good to be true, well, they're probably not. But once again, I think you always have to look at the circumstances, and we were all deceived, along with Mr Turnbull, as to the apparent authenticity of this email, and its authenticity was grounded very much on the basis that Mr Gretsch had come forward with apparently credible evidence that was tested in a Senate committee in a very public way. So it's a bit difficult to second guess the caution, if you like, that should have been exercised in relation to it. It was a serious allegation. It deserved to be aired. That indeed is the opposition's job. And of course, if you're going to subject everything to such caution, you would never ever go forward in terms of holding the government accountable. That is, in fact, the opposition's job.
Will the coalition support referring this matter now to the Senate Privileges Committee, now that we know what we do?
Well, look, I think that that's a matter that obviously might be given some consideration. That will be a matter for the Senate, and obviously there will be an opportunity to consider whether there should be a referral. It's not something that I'd be able to provide a view on right now.
Malcolm Turnbull, of course, did take a massive hit in the polls after this OzCar affair all blew up. Do you think he can recover? Can he convince voters that he does have good political judgment, that he's not just a political opportunist?
Well, I think that fair-minded voters, when looking at the facts of this, would appreciate that this was evidence, apparently on its face credible, that was brought forward by a senior public servant, well respected, not known as someone who would fabricate or misrepresent or even exaggerate information. And I can say that from my dealings with Mr. Gretsch, I would never have thought that of him. And then to have it tested in public in the Senate, that is something I think that fair-minded voters or fair-minded respondents to a news poll would no doubt take into account.
Why didn't Mr Turnbull release all of these emails and explain his relationship with Godwin Gretsch weeks ago, when everybody did start smelling a rat and thinking all of this just doesn't add up?
Well, I actually haven't spoken to Mr Turnbull today, but my understanding of this is twofold. Firstly, there is an appreciation as to Mr Gretsch's health and current circumstances, and we're very sorry about that. And secondly, the important thing was that there was an inquiry being conducted, and the first rule of any inquiry is that you don't preempt the outcome and you don't rush in to provide a whole lot of information about it that is the subject of an inquiry and no doubt the subject of findings. It would have been, certainly in my view, highly improper for Mr Turnbull to have brought forward all this information until Mr Gretsch in effect outed himself by saying that he had faked that email.
Finally, Helen Coonan, interest rates are kept on hold today at 3%. Did that surprise you, and do you expect these low rates to stay low for very long?
Well, I think the interesting thing here is that the bias in favour of easing has been brought back to a more neutral position. Obviously, some of the data is conflicting, but I think it shows that there is a bit of a tipping point and signs of growth that mean that the government should take a long, hard look at the spending in the stimulus, and with uncommitted monies there should be a good hard look at where the value for money really is before the government continues to run up this kind of debt and deficit that we have seen.
Acting Shadow Treasurer Helen Coonan, we have run out of time. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
And the